In this video, we will look at how to format worksheets in Tableau. If you've ever been confused where to go to format something, or if you've ever scratched your head about how the formatting pane works sometimes and totally not working other times, this video is for you. I'll see you in a bit. We will go pretty in-depth with some of the formatting options, especially the formatting sidebar. Even if you're already familiar with how to format worksheets in Tableau, I hope you will still consider watching the whole video. Even I myself discovered new things about formatting options while I was preparing this video, so it was quite worthwhile for me. If you want to skip to specific topics, I have added chapters in the description down below. Towards the end of this video, we will have a quick exercise on how we can recreate the formatting of this simple text table. Let's start with how to tackle formatting. My recommendation before you start formatting is to identify first what you are trying to format. I've broken it down to 3 things for now. Are you formatting the title, the mark, or something else? I will demo all of these, but let's get the big picture first. If you're formatting the worksheet title, specifically the font and alignment, use the title editor. If you're formatting the mark, use the marks card. If it's something else you're formatting, then use the format menu. You can access this either from the top menu right between the map and the server options, or by right-clicking on a pill in your canvas, or even by right-clicking a value in your view. When you click the format option, your usual sidebar that contains your fields temporarily gets replaced with the formatting sidebar. Let's jump to Tableau first and demonstrate all of these. If what we want to format is the title of the worksheet, we can simply double-click on the title space and it will bring up the title editor. For example, double-click, and this is the title editor. We can change the font, we can change the font style, we can change the size. We can also adjust the alignment. We can also add additional information like the data source name, the update time, page count, the username, and some additional data fields. Let's close this window. If what you want to format is the mark or something about that mark, a property of that mark, then we can use the marks card. In this example, we have a bar chart. This bar is represented in the marks card. Even though it says automatic, the icon there is actually a bar. So if what we want to change is the property of this bar, it could potentially be the color, the size, the label, the tooltip, or maybe something else, then we have to use the marks card. For example, if what we want to change is the color, we can click on the color property, we can take a look at the options, we can change the color uniformly, we can also drop the opacity, add a border, or a halo when it's applicable. So let's try these out. So on the color, we can change all of these colors if we want to. And at this point, it's going to be uniform. If we want this to be data-driven, we can select the field that will determine the color. For example, profit, drop that into color. And it will also change based on the value of that field. If this is what you decide to do, notice the icon right beside the pill, and this tells you it affects the color property. Let's remove this for now. Let's go back to color. We can change the opacity if we want to. The other thing that could be tricky is adding the border. In other applications, you may simply be able to right-click on the bar and add a border. But in this case, the border is really part of the mark, regardless of what the drawing is. It could be a bar, it could be a line, it could be a circle, any other shape. And the border is a color to that mark. Therefore, the border actually exists in the marks card under the color property. So if we wanted to add a border, click on the drop-down and then adjust the border. Halos are specific to symbol maps. In addition to border, you can add another layer of color that allows better contrast between the symbol and the background image. For example, in this case, we can add a border, but we can also add a halo. So on the drop-down, we can select a different color for the halo. Note that the halo is only available if you have a solid color. The moment you drop down the opacity, the halo actually disappears. And the second time you click on that color property, the halo is already disabled. Going back to the bar chart, should we want to have a field determining the color of the bars? Again, let's take a look at sales, drop that to color. The moment you click on the color property, you should also be able to adjust the color palette. So when we click on this edit colors, we can select a different color palette. Click OK. Note that yet another shortcut is to simply double click on the color legend. So when we click on the color legend, we're going to get to that same color palette. Let's take this away again. Let's explore some of the other properties. So size, if we wanted to drop the size, we can also go here. If we want to add a label that accompanies our mark, then we also need to target the marks card. For example, if we want sales to be shown right beside our bars, we can drag it over to label. And this particular label, we can click on this, and this property has a whole bunch of other properties that we can set. For example, this ellipses allows us to add additional text or additional fields if we want to. We can also adjust the font, the alignment, and which marks to label. In some cases, we might want all marks to have labels. In other cases, maybe just minimum and maximum. Other cases, maybe when it's selected or highlighted. Tableau also has this behavior of hiding some of the labels just in case there are overlaps. We can choose to override that. So in here, when we check allow labels to overlap, even though they may overlap other labels or other marks or other symbols, Tableau will still show those values. Let's try these out. For example, under label, click on the ellipses. Perhaps in here, we want to put US dollars. Under the font, right now, we can match the mark color. This gets really interesting if you have different colors that can be matched. For example, if we take category and put that in color, we can see that we have red bars and red labels, blue bars and blue labels, orange bars and orange labels. Let's click on this again. We can also decide to mark only the minimum and maximum. So click on this. And when this is the case, we can also adjust the scope. We may still want this for every cell or every bar, but in other cases, you may want a group minimum and maximum, or just at the table level. And we can also choose to withhold the minimum or the maximum. So let's try this out. Let's drag over segment onto columns. And in here, we still have the labels everywhere. Let's click on label, select minimum and maximum at the table level. And we can see that there is only 2 bars that have labels right now. If we set this to pane, we can see that each group now has its own minimum and maximum. If we wanted to adjust the tooltip, right now this is the default tooltip that Tableau has. We can click on the tooltip property. It brings up another editor that allows us to change the style of the tooltip. We can add additional text. We can create our own narrative within the tooltip. So for example, in here, click on this, make some adjustments, and the tooltip now looks a little bit different. Depending on the mark, you may get a 6th property. For example, if you have a line, you're going to get a 6th property called a path. These are just properties related to your mark. Specifically for a line chart, we can make adjustments. We can change this to a step line if we want to, or a jump chart. There are specific use cases for step lines and jump charts. I have a separate video that goes over the different use cases. I'm going to link it up in the card above and description down below. If you are not formatting the title or the mark, then usually we need to use the format menu. We can access this from the top level. So format is right beside map and server, and we can see options in here to format the workbook or the worksheet. When we select one of these options, for example, workbook, what happens is it temporarily replaces your sidebar. So your sidebar that has your fields is not there, and it's replaced temporarily with your formatting menu. At the workbook level, we can format the font, and we can also format the lines. There are other ways of accessing the formatting sidebar. For example, you can click on a pill and click on format, and it replaces that formatting sidebar specific to that field. Here's another example. If we click on sum of sales, there's also a format menu there. We can even right-click on some of the fields in our view. So right-click, format, and it gives us the same options. We can even right-click on field labels and format, and it will format field labels. Before we dive into the formatting pane any deeper, we need to note how these different options work. The general principle is that the more specific settings override more general settings. For example, if we are looking at font color And if we define font color in a few different places, the setting at the most specific place will stick, regardless of how the others have been defined. So what is this hierarchy? At the very top, or the most general place where we can define formatting, is at the workbook level, followed by the sheet level formatting, and then rows and columns, and then specific fields, and then our field labels, and the most specific settings are actually at the tooltip, the title, and the mark. And we've already seen how to format these in the previous demo. Let's demo some of these options at the formatting menu. Let's click on Format, Workbook. At the workbook level, we can format the fonts, and we can also format the lines. For example, if I select all, select a different font color, then we can see that all of the font colors have now changed to orange. Now, because this is at the workbook level, if we go to a different chart or view altogether, we can see that the font color has changed here as well. So let's undo this. Let's go back to our text table. Other options that we have in here is for worksheet titles, for dashboard titles. We also have story titles. We can also choose to expand lines. So all across our workbook, if we want to remove grid lines or change the style of the grid lines, the zero lines, the trend lines, we can make those adjustments as well. Let's look at the format menu again. Other options that we have in here will be font, alignment, shading, borders, and lines. We'll take a look at those shortly. But I also want to note that we can also change cell size if we need to. And there are shortcuts. For example, if you have a text table like this and you wanted to adjust the size of each cell, you can press Control up or down to make it taller or shorter, Control right arrow, or Control left arrow to make it wider or narrower. So for example, Control up makes the columns taller, Control down makes the columns shorter, Control right makes them wider, and Control left makes it narrower. Tableau also has a workbook theme in case you want to try this out. So for example, we can select Modern. It's going to look like this. Under Format, if we select Classic, this is some of the classic styles that Tableau has. And let's go back to the default theme. Now let's demonstrate some of these options using font first. So going back to Format and then Font. So let's try to understand what happens when we make changes at the worksheet level. So at the worksheet level, if we change the font color, we can see that this changes all of the text except for the title. Let's clear this. If we select the pane, change the color, we will notice that it only changes the color of the values. And this pane actually corresponds to whatever we have in the marks card. So in terms of hierarchy, if we change the style at the marks card level, so in here in text, and if I change this color to something else, maybe let's make it red and click on OK, we can see now that we have a misalignment. In your formatting menu, it's still orange, but what's showing up in your screen is actually red. And it's because this text property in your marks card is more specific. It's going to override that. Let's undo this. If we choose to select header, change the color, we can see that this affects only the row and the column headers. Clear this again. If we change tooltip, change the color, we can see that by default, it has changed the color of the tooltip. And in terms of specificity, if we change this style in the marks card, so if we click on tooltip and make changes from here, let's make this a little bit bigger, make this a different color altogether. Again, we still have that misalignment. In your tooltip, in your format pane, it shows that it should be orange and 10-point font. However, what's showing up is something different, and it's because we have defined and restyled this using the marks card. Let's undo this. And you can follow the theme. Same thing with title. If we change this title to something else, make this a different color, we can see that by default, it makes changes to the title. But if we double click on this title and make a different kind of style, that new style will override the old style because this title property, when we style it at that level, it's more specific than the worksheet level. Let's undo this again. Let's just walk through the rows and the columns as well. So when we go to rows, we can change the header. And if we change the style, at the row level, it's actually simply going to give us a different font color for any of the row headers. And notice in here, it actually skips the field labels. So that's what we call the field label. Let's undo this. Let's clear. Under columns, if we change the header to a different color altogether, we can also notice that Tableau has some different behaviors. In this case, it will consider these field labels as part of the column headers, and it has changed all of these other headers together as well. We will also notice that at each of these levels, at the sheet, rows, and columns, we also have a choice to change the total and the grand total styles. So let's clear this style first. We go back to the sheet level and change the style for total. So in here, change that color. We can see that any of the columns that's either a subtotal or a grand total, the font color has changed. In general, the different properties will behave similarly, although there can be some minor differences. And we'll walk through some of these differences later on. So let's clear this and let's take a look at some of the other options. So for alignment, we have slightly different options, but again, at the sheet level, it affects the whole sheet. Rows only affects rows, columns only affects columns. And if you have styles that are contradicting, the rows and the columns will override the sheet. The options for shading, again, they're very similar with minor differences. Same thing with border. And as far as lines are concerned, it's very similar to the options we saw at the workbook level. So in here, we can target the grid lines, the zero lines, trend lines, reference lines, drop lines, axis rulers, and axis ticks. Let's test out the hierarchy of formatting one more time. Let's start at the sheet level. Let's say we want to change our header formatting. So in this case, I'm going to go to header and perhaps change my font color to orange. And we can see that all of the headers have changed. It has an orange font color. If we go to rows, we can see that by default, it is inheriting that font color. However, we can override this. So in this case, at the row level, I can click on the drop down, change this to something else. For example, I may want to change this to purple and maybe bold. Now you have two conflicting styles. At the sheet level, it is orange. In the row level, it is purple. But purple sticks because row is more specific than sheet. I may also decide to put another style specifically to the headers of the category, and I can get to the category style by either right-clicking on this field in the view and selecting Format, or I can also go to the formatting sidebar under Fields, I can select Category. Right now we are targeting the header, and if we change this style, whatever style we choose this to be will be the one that sticks. We are seeing orange right now because this is what default was inherited, but this was not the last style that we have consciously applied. So in this case, again, if we change this to something else, for example, a greenish color, make this bold, maybe make this a different font style as well, that is the one that will stick in our view. So we can review right now the 3 different levels we've applied styles to, but only one is going to be visible in your view. So we applied style at the sheet level. At the sheet level, this is orange. At the row level, we've changed the style and we've made this purple, but at a specific field level, so when we go to fields, category, this is the one that will stick. And in some ways, this is what makes formatting a little bit complicated or confusing, because we need to track down where the last style was customized or applied. Let's clear the formatting of this sheet. So under Format, let's clear the worksheet formatting. The other thing to note is clearing worksheet formatting will only clear any of the styles that are applied using the Format menu, meaning it is not going to affect any customization or any new style you apply to the title or any new style you apply using the marks card. For example, in here, if I change the style of the title to something else, if I change my tooltip, change this to something else, right here, clearing the formatting, if I go back to Format, clear worksheet formatting, right now it's actually disabled because there is nothing that we've done using the Format menu. Now let's move on to shading. There's a couple settings in here that may not be very apparent. Level refers to dimensions, and there is a one-to-one correspondence between this and the pills you have in that shelf. For example, for rows, we see 3 discrete pills in our row shelf. We have category, subcategory, and segment. When we take a look at row banding, there are 3 tick marks, 1, 2, and 3. And this corresponds to those 3 discrete pills. The first one is the first pill, The second or the middle tick mark refers to subcategory, and the third tick mark refers to segment. And it's the same thing with column banding. It refers to the discrete pills you have in the column shelf. In this example, you have 2 tick marks. So the first tick mark refers to region, and the second tick mark refers to ship mode. The band size determines how many of the values are included in the band. For example, right now in row banding, the band size is 0. It means we're trying to shade every 0 segment. If we move this tick mark to 1, then we're going to shade every 1 segment. If we move it to 2, we're trying to shade every 2 segment values. However, should we move this level? So right now we are targeting subcategory, and let's move this band size to 2. It means that we are going to shade every 2 subcategory values. Let's see this in action. I have a sample text table in here, and let's try to understand how this is going to be affected by shading. For example, if we simply want to have a background color for the whole worksheet, then we need to make sure we change the background color at the worksheet level. So in here, we can change this to a different color altogether. Note that this is going to be affected by your band size and your level. For now, I've set both of these to 0, and we are going to see the effects of these shortly. Let's clear this. Now let's take a look at what Pane does. In here, under Pane, select a different color altogether, and we can see that Pane actually targets all the values inside your text table. And we noted before that this corresponds to the mark in the marks card. One more thing to note is that when we change the default style, you're also going to find the header of that style in bold font. This is a slight and very subtle indication to us that this style has been changed. And when you see a bold font, it also means you can right-click on that and you can clear this. Now let's take a look at the header. If we change the color of the header to a different color, we can see that it targets all of the row and the column headers. Let's undo this. Now here is an interesting piece. When we go to rows and target header, we can see that it targets all of the row headers, and this is the row header. When we go to columns and target the column headers, it's going to target all the column headers. However, we can see that there is an area in here that's completely left out. This is a little bit different when we are dealing with font styles. With font styles, it will actually include all of these as part of the column headers. However, when we are shading, it doesn't. So how do we target this area? In this case, we're going to need to target field labels. So we can right-click on this area. So right-click and then format. We can also access this from the format menu at the very top and selecting field labels. So the title of our formatting pane right now is Format Field Labels. And from here, we can either target the field label shading, or we can also target the corner. It will do the exact same thing. So from here, corner. So let's clear this again. We are now back to our main worksheet. And let's try to understand row banding and column banding. As I've mentioned earlier, the tick marks you see in the level correspond to the pills you see in your row shelf. In this case, we have 3 tick marks, and level 1 corresponds to category, the second tick mark corresponds to subcategory, and the third tick mark corresponds to segment. So how does that work? In this case, we're going to have to increase the band size. And just to demonstrate this better, I'm going to change this to a different color. So let's change the color to something bright, and we can see exactly what happens. When you change the color, the band size actually gets pushed to 1. So right now, our level is at category. The first value is not going to receive the shading or not going to receive the formatting, but every other category after that will receive the shading. In this case, we have 3 values for category. So what we find is the first one, furniture, it doesn't have any shading, but the second one will receive some shading. If we had more, it means that the fourth category will receive the shading as well. Let's move the level down, which means we are now going to target subcategory. These are all of our subcategories. So when we move the level down, we can see that every other subcategory, including the totals, are considered in the shading. So the first one is not shaded, second one is shaded, third one not shaded, fourth one is shaded. And total is actually considered as part of this interval. If we move the band size one more time, it means that we are going to shade every 2 values of subcategory. So let's slide this down. Again, this is exactly what we see. The first two will be skipped, the next two will be shaded, next two will be skipped, next will be shaded. Same thing for 3. If we slide this down to 3, it's going to be every 3 values that it's finding under the subcategory. Let's slide the band size back to 1, and this time let's move the level. So in the level, we slide it down. It's on the 3rd tick mark, which means we are now targeting segment. And if we have a band size of 1, it means that we are going to shade every other segment value. And this is what we're seeing. It's the alternating color. If we want every 2 values, then we can slide down the band size, every 3 values, every 4 values, every 5 values. The same principle gets applied for column banding. So let's remove the formatting for Pane. So right click and clear, formatting for header, right click and clear, and I'm going to slide down the band size and level for column banding. If we adjust column banding color right now, so again, a bright color so we can see exactly what's happening. So at this point, we are at the first level, which means it's corresponding to region. The first region, which is central, no formatting. But as we scroll down, we're going to see that the next region will be formatted, 3rd region not formatted, but the 4th one is going to be formatted. If we change the level, so now we change it to ship mode. So if we slide this down, then we can see that every other ship mode, including the total, is going to be shaded. We can set the band size. So if we want every 2, every 3, every 4, and so on. Note that a similar setting exists for borders, but borders does not have band size. It only has levels. The same concept exists. However, there is an extra tick mark. For borders, the very first level is at the worksheet level. So if we were to change the border for the worksheet level, there's only going to be 2 lines. So let's change this, make this into really dark black. And at the header level, again, really dark black. And what this means is there's going to be just 2 lines. The first one is right underneath all of your headers. And the second one is right after your grand total or whatever the last row is. So that is the first level for a row divider in borders. The second tick mark is the one that shows up for category, 3rd one, subcategory, and 4th one for segment. For column divider, we also get that extra tick mark. So the first one is at the workbook level. The second one corresponds to the first blue pill, and the last one is our second blue pill in our column shelf. If we are targeting specific fields for formatting, there is a difference between formatting a blue pill and a green pill. I have a separate video on blue versus green or discrete versus continuous, and I will link it up in the card above and the description down below should you want a refresher. If you have a blue pill, the formatting pane that shows up in the sidebar will have 2 tabs and it's going to be either header or pane. If you have a green pill, the formatting sidebar will have 2 tabs. It's going to be either axes or pane. And notice in here that header will only ever exist if you have a blue pill and axis will only ever exist if you have a green pill. Now the other caveat in here is only one of these tabs will affect your formatting. And again, that can be the confusing part. Your blue pill, if you place that in either your row shelf or your column shelf, it produces a header, which means it will only ever be affected by any changes you do under the header tab. The changes that you apply under the pane tab will not have any effect whatsoever. The same thing is true for your green pill. If your green pill is either in your row shelf or your column shelf, it will produce an axis. Therefore, only changes you do on the axis tab will have some kind of effect on your view. So the question is, what is the pane for? Well, the pane is if you have either of these pills in the marks card. And we know that in terms of hierarchy, this is going to be the default, but if we go ahead to the marks card and make additional changes there, those will override these changes. Let's demonstrate these in Tableau. Let's say we want to format category. Right now, category is in the row shelf. Category shows up in your table as a series of headers. So let's click on this pill, format, and we can see that we're currently targeting category when we're formatting. Let me change the font under header. So in here, change the font, make this orange, make this a little bit bigger. Right now, this works. However, if I accidentally made a mistake and clicked on pane and made my formatting in here, this will actually not have any effect whatsoever. So even if I change the font to green, change the font size, it's not going to have any effect whatsoever. The only time the Pane tab will affect your formatting is if this field is actually somewhere in the marks card. And right now we are targeting font. So if I move category over to text, then it's going to have an effect. Here's the other caveat. It's not by default. So if I move category right now to text, we can see that all this text is still black. Let's actually just rearrange this first. So this is still black right now because it is sharing one more value. Sum of sales is still here, but the moment I take away sum of sales, you should see that now it actually takes the formatting I have under Pane. So we have a green font on our view. So it is completely disregarding the header. So header, I have an orange font because it's no longer in a header. So a field specific formatting will only apply to one of these tabs. For a blue pill, the values in here are either going to be a header or a value in the Pane. However, if the value is in Pane, the marks card will still override this. So if we decide to change the font again within the marks card, it is going to be more specific and it's going to override whatever we have applied at the Pane level. So under text, we can change this. And in this case, we're going to need to target the properties we have changed in Pane if we want to override it. In this case, we have changed the font size and we've also changed the font style and the color. So let's make this into purple. Apply. And then now we can see that at the header level, it is orange, but it's not applicable because right now our category is not a header. If you go to Pane, this was supposed to be green, but it's not being applied because we have yet another style that's actually coming from the marks card. And the marks card is our purple color. The same principle applies for our green pill. If I click on format in sum of sales, it is going to give me a formatting pane with two tabs. I have axes and I have Pane. Right now, this sum of sales is in rows, which means this is my vertical axis, which means the formatting that is applicable to this is only at the axis level. Anything I do in Pane will not have any effect whatsoever. For example, if we target shading for the axes, it will affect the axes. Let's clear this. Let's try to target the font. So if I change this font to orange, it is going to have an effect. However, if I go to Pane, sales does not exist in my marks card. Anything I do in Pane will not have any effect whatsoever in my view. So even if I change the font style in here, make this bold, make this a little bit different, make it bigger, it is not going to have any effect whatsoever in my view because my sales is an axis and it's only going to be affected by the axis tab. Our formatting in the Pane will affect sales if sales is somewhere in your marks card. So for example, maybe let's just adjust this, make sure that we don't have too many values. I'm just going to set this to year. So I have 1, 2, 3, 4 values in here. If I take my sales and put that in label and set this to text, then we can see that the formatting we had. So right now, if we format sales, format, whatever formatting we have in Pane is what takes effect. The axis has no effect now. So only Pane has an effect because sales is actually now in our marks card. And our pill can only ever be in the marks card or in the shelves. It's one or the other. Let's put some of these concepts to practice. Let us now try to recreate this simple formatted text table. Let's do this in steps. Let us start with the header. So let's go to Format, Shading. In here, we can target all of our columns, provide a black background. We can also go back to the font, and with our font, we can change the header font to white and make that a little bit bold. Remember that one of the quirks is with shading, it doesn't include the field labels, but with font, the formatting actually changes the font color to white. So that's just one of the quirks with formatting. So in here, let us target our field labels. So right click, Format. The formatting sidebar now changes to field labels, and we're simply just going to change the shading, and we can target either the default or the corner. Both of those will do the trick. So in here, default, make that into black. Let's also adjust the borders. Right now we can see some white borders across our column header, so we're just going to remove that. So under Format, Borders, let's go to Sheet, and we're simply going to change our column divider to none. So let's target both Pane as well as header. We are still seeing some things, but those ones are specific to our totals. So we are just going to target total as well. So in here, change this, none, as well as header is none. So now what we have is a clean column header. So just black background, white font. Let us now target the row banding. We have a light beige color for every other category that we have. So let's go to shading. Here we are targeting our row banding for every other category that we have. And we can see in here that category is the middle pill. It is represented by the middle tick mark in your level. So let's change this. And we can see that the light gray background right now is affecting every other category. So we simply need to change the color at this point. So in here, make this into light beige, as well as our header. The next one is to shade our totals differently. One thing to note though, we need to make sure that our total column headers, they remain as black background with white font. So here we want our row totals to have a gray background. Let's go to rows. Let's change our total in here so that it's a gray background. When we color our column totals, we need to make sure that we're going to leave off our header. We don't want to change the formatting of the header. So let's go to the columns tab. And this time around, we can see that the inherited background is still black. So we're not going to touch that, but we're simply going to change the pane into gray. The final step in this simple exercise is just adding some red lines. The red lines are affecting the worksheet level as well as the totals. There is one red line at the very top, one red line at the very bottom, and every total also has a red line. So here, let's go to border. We're going to go to the sheet level. We are going to define our row divider at level 0, at the first tick mark, because remember, that is at the worksheet level, and we're going to change the style as well. So in here, change this into a thick red color. And we're also going to drop down the level to 0, or the first one. And what this does is it creates a red line in the beginning and at the end of the worksheet. Now we're also going to add one more level for row totals. So let's go to row, under total, again, make this into a thick red line. We're going to add that for header as well. And this is our final result. So this is probably way more formatting concepts than you thought you'd find in this video. Let's just recap. When we are formatting worksheets in Tableau, the first thing to ask is what are we formatting? And we can break this down to either the title, the mark, or something else. And that allows us to really understand what we're targeting and how we're going to target that. Now, if there are any collisions, if there are styles that are applied at multiple different levels, we need to remember that the more specific style, the more specific setting will override the more general style. If something is applied at the workbook level, at the worksheet level, and at a specific field level, the specific field settings will override the more general settings. In terms of shading, there is a band size and a level. For the border, there is also a level, but one difference between shading and border level is at the border level, you get an extra tick mark. The first tick mark targets the worksheet level. When we are targeting specific fields to format, it matters whether you have a discrete or continuous field. When you format a discrete field, it's going to give you two tabs. You have header and pane. If you are formatting a continuous field, it's going to give you an axis and a pane tab. And the other thing to remember here is only one of these tabs will have an effect on your formatting because your field is either going to be just at the header or at the pane, or if we're working with continuous, it's either just going to be the axes or in the values or in the pane level. I had fun creating this video. I hope you found this video useful. I hope you learned something new. I hope there is something in here that you can use in your Tableau projects. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you again next time.